So far we've worked on defining and deepening our understanding of what literacy means. We've had the chance to look at some important statistics regarding adolescent literacy, and you've had the chance to analyze your own classroom to identify how language and literacy is showing up during an average class. Now we're going to focus in on two of the four language domains that we had talked about earlier. We're going to look at reading and writing. This session is all about identifying and naming the types of reading and writing that you're asking students to do on a regular basis in your content area or discipline. By doing this, what we hope that you'll find is that each type of reading and writing challenges students to utilize specific literacy skills in different ways. So as an example, think about yourself as a proficient reader. Compare the kinds of things that you would do as a reader if you were to sit down and try to make meaning of a poem versus trying to sit down and make meaning of a newspaper article. All of those thinking processes and strategies that you would use as a reader, they change based on what's sitting in front of you. Those two genres demand very different things from readers. And this is important to know when we're asking students to read and write in certain ways. We have to be sure that we are supporting them in order to do those things successfully. So the same thing would go for writing. Imagine yourself sitting down to write a poem versus sitting down to write a newspaper article. Very different. The process, the thinking, everything changes based on the type of writing that you're doing. Because of all this, we need to be very intentional about the way that we plan for and support our students. Right now I'm going to pass it over to Evan McClintock, who's going to do a short demonstration about how he would approach this activity as a math teacher.
You might be a teacher who teaches math or science, and so you feel that there isn't a whole lot of direct reading instruction or writing instruction that goes on in your classroom. What I'd like to challenge you to think about is reading from a slightly different perspective. If we think of reading as making meaning and interpreting meaning from some sort of written inscription on a page or on a calculator readout, students do a whole lot of reading and writing in math, science, and art classes. So what I want to do is just give a couple of examples of the kind of reading and the kind of writing that might happen in a secondary math classroom, which you may not have thought of previously as a kind of reading. The most parallel kind of reading that you might think of in relation to reading an actual text would be story problems. So we use story problems a lot, or contextual problems, in math class, where students have to read some kind of text and make some sort of mathematical moves to find a solution to a story problem. That kind of reading is, you'll probably find, very challenging for lots of students. It calls on more than just a procedure. It requires that students make sense of a situation and bring their mathematical knowledge to make sense of that situation, which is a very different kind of process than solving a symbolic problem. But another kind of reading that we do a lot in math class is interpreting symbolic representations of relationships. A really common one is the typical linear equation. So what happens is students might learn this base kind of symbolic representation for a linear relationship, but then they have to solve things where they need to notice that what they're solving is actually this, and they need to get it to this form. So it's another kind of meaning making that is a kind of reading that's specifically encountered a lot in math class. Another reading could be just a reading of a graph. So if this is, I don't know, speed and how expensive a speeding ticket is, this has some meaning, right? That students need to bring to this inscription and make sense of mathematically. So when you're finding yourself wondering, well, where's the reading in my class? Really consider what you're asking students to do. And anytime you're asking them to make meaning of something that's written in some form, you're asking them to read. In terms of writing, we do a lot of writing in math class too. The most maybe similar to what you find in an English class would be writing an explanation for, or a justification for a solution to a problem. So any sort of explanatory writing that you're asking students to do, or anytime you're asking them to explain in writing, that's the kind of writing that you're asking them to do. So the way that you're asking students to demonstrate what they understand, whether it's verbally or in writing, is something to really think about, because some of your students may need some different supports in order to show you what they really understand. Another kind of writing is taking some kind of symbolic representation and working with it, and maybe explaining along the way what I'm doing and how I know I'm able to make the moves I'm making. But that's another kind of writing. So solving symbolic problems. And then another kind of writing, which is probably the most formal and the most pervasive in terms of the field of mathematics, is writing proofs. So proof writing is a really specific kind of writing that we introduce students to. In some ways at this explanatory type of writing, but when it gets more formal in secondary classes, especially geometry, there's a particular style of writing and goal of writing that we ask students to engage in. And if you've tried to teach kids how to write proofs, you know that that's a really challenging kind of writing for them to do. But whatever class you're teaching, you are engaging students in lots of different kinds of reading and lots of different kinds of writing. What we're asking you to do in this activity is to identify what types of reading and what types of writing you do engage students in, and then think about what might be challenging about those different types of reading and different types of writing.